Hello and welcome again. Thank you for joining us, today, and welcome to another edition of Resilient Urban Systems webinar series, organized jointly by UNDP and UNDRR. Over the past decade, the global risk landscape has undergone a rapid shift and continues to become more complex and uncertain. There are certain trends, which all of us might have noted surely. The risk attributes pattern and their manifestations have dramatically changed, becoming increasingly systemic, interconnected, and mutually reinforcing. New tipping points related to climate change and biodiversity loss are being breached, pushing the ecological boundaries and creating untold risks and more unforeseen challenges. Risks and vulnerabilities are becoming more shared across risk typologies with shared underlying risk drivers. And more pertinent to our times today, development choices that we make today have become a major driver of risks. And risks from development are becoming more pervasive, while our primary focus has remained on risks to side of the equation. The theater of risks and development action has gravitated firmly towards cities and urban centers. The phenomenon of urbanization of risks is accompanied by urbanization of development challenges like poverty, inequalities, and marginalization, etc. And many more such trends are already visible to us. However, it is very gratifying for us as a DRR community to note that we as a community have always been ahead of the curve in recognizing this risk development interface much earlier. It is noted in the IDNDR decade, 1989, in the Yokohama Strategy, 1994, in the HFA, 2005, and is reinforced in the Sendai Framework for DRR, which exhorts countries and communities to reduce risks and to prevent disasters. In this backdrop, the topic for today's deliberations is provocative in more ways than one. It poses a challenging notion for risk management practitioners like us and beckons us to think beyond the traditional orientation to help elevate the DRR practice towards risk prevention, investing in resilience building, and by focusing on vulnerability reduction to prevent hazards from turning into disasters. However, all of us know that it is easier said than done. Despite this acknowledgement, the frequency and magnitude of disasters continues to rise with higher socioeconomic costs. Recurrent disasters and crises means more pressing demands for humanitarian and recovery needs and shrinking resources for risk prevention and reduction. At the same time, it is encouraging to note that increasing investments are being made by organizations, countries, practitioners, and other stakeholders to prevent hazards from turning into disasters. Newer and innovative approaches are being fostered, and we will learn about a few of these efforts and investments during the course of the deliberations today on can disasters be avoided. Of course, this question does not and cannot have a binary answer. If it were to be posed to us, all of us will answer in the negative as no, disasters cannot be avoided. Surely it is not a zero-sum game that we are looking towards, but the idea might be to ensure that there are many hazards which easily get converted into disasters due to certain acts of omission and commission. And by hindsight, it appears that yes, some of these were perfectly avoidable. Needless to say, while it might not be possible to completely avoid disaster events, yet it is surely possible to minimize and to reduce the wide-ranging socioeconomic and other costs being currently borne by countries and communities. Avoiding disasters is a goal, howsoever utopian it might sound, that practitioners need to work towards. It seems that some successful interventions have been made, and it will be good to benefit therefrom. The webinar today will look at some of the successful interventions and examine the equation with empirical evidence, case studies, tools and techniques to advance action and to replicate the same. It will also identify potential pathways integrating DRR and adaptation interventions for improved risk prevention while exploring the potential offered by digital and frontier technologies for improved risk reduction outcomes. However, before we turn to our eminent speakers, let me first of all request Mr. Sanjay Bhatia. He is head of UNDRR's Office in Incheon and lead anchor for the MCR 2030 initiative, as well as Getty, to share some observations emanating in this regard from the midterm review of the Sendai framework to help set the context. Mr. Sanjay Bhatia, please.
Thank you, Rajiv, and welcome to all the participants and the speakers. I think Rajiv has covered a lot of good background. Just to add to that, I think a lot of you would be knowing about the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction, which was adopted in 2015 and goes on till 2030 in parallel with the Agenda 2030 and the Paris Agreement. So in 2015, all the countries, the member states of the United Nations, they got together with their stakeholders and discussed the situation of risk reduction and the importance of having a renewed global framework to follow the Hugo framework to guide member states, but also all stakeholders on what to do to reduce disaster risk. And the focus of the Sendai framework was not on the why, but on the how. Now, recently, just a couple of months back, we had the midterm review of the Sendai framework, which is conducted to understand any barriers, any challenges, to monitor the progress, and to decide the way forward. So this midterm review was again attended by all the member states, plus a large number of stakeholders. And the conclusion was that we are off track. We are far behind not only the global targets that we had adopted in the Sendai framework, but the DRR practices and approaches in general. There's a lot more that needs to be done. Risk reduction is not being fully factored into policies, into decision-making, especially in the financial mechanisms, both at the national level, at the local level, and the global level. The local level is a major gap area, which was identified by the national players and the other stakeholders. There is a lot to be done at the local level. There are also many opportunities that the local offers. But if these opportunities are not taken, then they create more complex risks, exactly the way Rajiv was referring to. Apart from that, capacity development is an impediment. There needs to be more building of capacity for all players, including national and local governments, but also the stakeholders, and everyone has a role to play in that. So these were some of the gaps which were identified by member states, along with the issues of complex emergencies, cascading impacts, the climate emergency, and so on. Now, the midterm review ended with a call for renewed action and renewed efforts by all the players, not just the governments, but also the stakeholders, to try to accelerate and to identify certain accelerators and move forward quickly. It is a big task, especially if we want to achieve the SDGs. Then we cannot do that unless we address the disaster risk and the climate risk. So I think this webinar comes at a very opportune moment just after the midterm review. And with this provocative topic, as Rajiv mentioned, can disasters be avoided? Just to remind us, to take us back to 2015, when we all had these discussions and planned a framework which could take us forward. Perhaps this webinar can help to renew that enthusiasm by sharing some of the good practices and approaches and the investments that have been done by governments and other stakeholders, and inspire action towards accelerating implementation of the Sendai framework. So with that, I would like to end my remarks and again, thank everyone for joining.
Thank you, Sanjay ji. Thanks for sharing these observations from the MTR, of course, identifying some of the key gaps and challenges, and also the accelerators needed to ramp up action in terms of mainstreaming risks into all aspects of our development and socioeconomic life. With that, let me turn to the first set of speakers that we have today with us, who will be sharing the work that they're having advancing under the Disasters Avoided project. So the team comprises Professor Ilan Kelman, who is a professor of disasters and health at University College London, England, and a professor at the University of Agder, Kristiansand, Norway. His overall research interest is linking disasters and health, integrating climate change into both. Two main areas of his focus have been disaster diplomacy, how disasters do and do not create peace, and focusing on safe living in island and polar regions. Professor Ilan Kelman will be accompanied by Dr. Anna Prados, who is a research associate professor in the Joint Center for Earth Systems Technology in the University of Maryland, Baltimore, USA, and also by Gareth Byatt, who is an independent consultant working on urban risks and resilience for various industries and business sectors. He's an ambassador for the Institute of Risk Management, and he regularly undertakes research work and also works with academic institutions around the world. Let's hear it from Professor Ilan and his team as to how can disasters be avoided. Have there been any success stories? What lessons can be learned, and how can practitioners like us benefit from this analysis and experience to improve our own interventions going ahead? Thank you, and over to you.
Thank you, Rajiv. And just to be able to say that one of our colleagues, Anna, unfortunately isn't able to join us on this short presentation today. But as you quite rightly say, Anna is part of our team. So what Ilan and myself are going to go through today is we're going to focus on three main things. And you touched upon it just now, Rajiv. Just before I do, just want to be able to say thank you to UNDP, UNDRR and the MCR 2030 initiative. We appreciate the opportunity to be able to provide this brief overview today. And this brief overview is about our Disasters Avoided initiative, really quickly touching upon some examples that we're finding and some themes, and what we think more can be done to be able to work towards avoiding disasters. And with that, Ilan, over to you.
So thanks so much. So welcome, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity, and thank you to my colleagues, Anna and Gareth, for being part of this. As mentioned, I am Ilan. I am in London, where it's actually rather cool, not quite the boiling which Southern Europe is experiencing in those cities. So I've put my contact details in the chat so we can continue discussing and connecting after this, particularly recognizing that last year London was hot and did broil and broke temperature records. So when we come to disasters avoided, we do recognize that disasters are occurring, and we do want to research what we can do about them to save lives and really just implement the usual idea that prevention is cheaper than cure. So we are researching new and original examples, very kindly funded by NASA, the US Space Agency. Then we're going to try and drill down, look deeply, and try to determine who avoids disasters. Why are some avoided and some are not? And how can we inspire others to go forward? So a lot of this will be on the website, which Gareth is kindly designing, and we do want you to be involved. Again, my contact details are in the chat. Gareth will provide his, and our emails are on the screen. So next slide, please. We do have many examples if you just want to scroll through them, Gareth. And some people will saying, well, this map looks rather strange, but actually, no, this is a sort of map we need to present more, because you can see that we have a variety of locations of hazards and of vulnerabilities that we are researching to really try and promote and implement what does disasters avoided mean, particularly for urban environments. And again, so that cities can learn from others and others can learn from cities. Next slide, please. What we are finding is that, of course, hazards occur. The environment does all these things, situations, events, processes, and we have the names for them: earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, temperatures, landslides, tsunamis. But fundament from over 4 decades of disaster science is that disasters can be avoided no matter what the environment does. In fact, simply by looking around, we see the causes of disasters, we see the vulnerabilities, which our 2 opening speakers mentioned, which means nothing should be a surprise. This idea of a black swan, which has become popular, it doesn't make sense. By simply looking at our cities and looking at the people within the cities, we see the vulnerabilities and we know the disasters that could happen. We cannot know everything about nature. Nature, the environment, still brings surprises, but the disaster should not be. There are no black swans in disasters, and talking about them as shocks is similar. We know what's going to happen. We know where and we know why, which means that we have the experience to deal with them if we make that choice. Next slide, please. Because we have choices, because it is up to us, and you're all here for a reason because of your expertise, we know that disasters are not natural. In fact, we really try and avoid the phrase natural disaster, just calling them disasters, to highlight the fact that it's the choices that we are all making which can avoid disasters or which will then create disasters. And I've put another link into the chat of a book which I wrote on exactly this point to really point out that there are so many examples of us creating disasters and avoiding disasters. And I will now hand over to Gareth to provide some specifics from our research. Thank you.
Thanks, Ilan. So, of course, in this particular webinar today, we'd love to have time to share a number of the examples that you saw on that map. We're going to focus on one, maybe touch upon a couple of others in the amount of time that we have available here, and talk about some of the tie-ins with cities and towns, urban environments. So as part of our research on the map, you would have seen, hopefully, one of the pins is about some positive work that's taking place in Vietnam. We know it's, of course, it is a flood-prone country, high levels of heat, particularly in the south, of course, as many will know. And this example of a particular project from the Green Climate Fund and UNDP and other parties working together, bringing together finance, working on a risk-based type of way so that, as you can see here, some 4,000 flood-resilient homes are being built in the central coastal area of the country. It's linked into not only the project team, but also linked into the regional development plan of Vietnam itself. So it's stitched into the greater whole, if you like. And it's very much being informed by intelligent use of data, mapping of flood risks, understanding what the particular risks can be, not just now, but in future. So looking at different scenarios. And of course, the societal needs of the people that are living in these areas. So different people with different livelihoods can be affected in different ways. And linking up, it was mentioned earlier, some of the aspects around ecology. I think, Rajiv, you mentioned some of the needs to be able to make sure that there's a stronger linkage with ecology. And this particular project is an example of where discussing with the local people who've got specific knowledge about what can work best means that when we're undertaking activities such as planting mangroves, it's also done in a way that takes account of the socioeconomics, the fishing people, what works best for them. And in some ways, I think, Ilan, I'll use a description that you use sometimes about thinking about those people on the front line, the local communities, as not the last mile, but the first mile. So actually making sure that that engagement is being done. Now, in terms of examples of how this particular project is deriving successes, we have seen, and they won't be the last, of course, some storms in the past couple of years, and those with the resilient housing, taking into account good risk assessments that get into the level of detail, such as the height of the mezzanine floor, depending on the specifics of the micro locality, have shown that it has offered greater resilience. And I think it's fair to say as well, from discussions I've had with people, that word is getting around, if you like. So people are understanding the true benefits of it. And I think it is important to mention just once more the linkage into the overall program of work that regional areas and the country has. It's an example of linking in successfully. Now, to that point, there are a number of factors. We're still working on these, as Ilan mentioned. We're still working on our Disasters Avoided initiative. We are going to be making our website available quite soon with case studies and associated information. But we're certainly seeing some common factors in terms of minds to avoid disasters. Sometimes I hear the term chronic unease, which is a positive type of way of thinking about what might happen. It's about thinking about what ifs, and it's about making sure that we're always learning, as indeed we are on webinars such as the one that we're holding today, and the series that's being held by MCR 2030, and of course other MCR 2030 webinars as well. Good governance and accountability, I think that stands for itself, from government, of course, but also from other different actors as well. And that accountability to actually take action, informed by good data. And that can include things such as Earth observations, making sure that people are trained to use the data appropriately, making sure that the data is always orientated towards decision-making and action, and that we actually do something with it. The societal cohesion side of things. So I mentioned the first mile, if you like, but it's society, it's the public, it's also businesses and how they can be involved, making sure that we've got that cohesive approach. It can work. We're seeing examples of this. Quantifying the outcomes as well. I've certainly learned from some of the panelists here about the need to be able to make sure that we quantify appropriately the outcomes. We can quantify the risks. Let's quantify the outcomes in an appropriate kind of way. Those outcomes being, of course, about people, the environment, economic value, perhaps using appropriate visuals to be able to show that as well. And Sanjay touched upon the funding side of things earlier in the introduction. And we're certainly seeing examples of intelligent action, so that funding is coming from a variety of sources and it's being used in the right way. People are learning so that if there and when there are things to improve, they are being improved. So to avoid disasters, we can work together, we can conserve the planet, we can make a difference. I'm just going to finish on a couple of points here. Rajiv, conscious of time, of course, as ever. We can apply this type of thinking to a system. This is an example. There are other types of urban systems that exist out there, and I'm not proposing to go into the detail of this particular system here. I've got a more detailed version of it coming up in the next click. But essentially, what we can do, we can take these kind of points and thread them into the urban system, so we can make sure we focus on those governance needs, the ecological side of things. We build with rather than on, for example. That, of course, links into our physical system and how we manage that appropriately, all of the linkages with climate change and everything else. And that socioeconomic side of things, which we're seeing is crucial to this. So you can map that in greater detail, such as described here. You can apply that to diagnostics. There are ways, Sanjay talked about the SDGs earlier, there are ways that we can make sure that we map to those global indicators whilst keeping things at a specific local level, an individual level, a family level as well, making a difference to those people. So we're seeing positive evidence. We do believe that the Act Now approach and to drive to make sure that we do have a healthy planet and right kind of society, an economy that works with both of those things, and particularly I think the working together is something that Ilan, myself and Anna are seeing through this project. So we do think that disasters can be avoided. And with that, Rajiv, I'll hand back to you if I may.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Professor Ilan and Gareth, for sharing your observations and insights on this issue. Some of the, points, it's always good to get a reminder, of these, that there is nothing natural about these disasters. We have been saying it for years, but apparently there are still, discordant sort of, voices or less firm believers into this. And it's good to have a reminder around that. It's good to also know that it is the choices that we make as people, as communities, as countries, which tend to contribute towards increased disaster risk. It's also a reminder that many of these should not come as a surprise to us, since we know much of what are those risk factors, what are the those socioeconomic vulnerabilities, which are driving these risks. And if we have them better understood, then it's always, possible to make timely intervention to address some of these challenges and to prevent these hazards from turning into a disaster. Of course, it's good also to be reminded that investments in prevention are always better than cure at a later end. And we know that it's a lot of, today, a lot of humanitarian and other needs are burgeoning every day, and it's not sustainable anymore, for the international community also to continue to be on the same path. And thank you also so much for sharing all those valuable, resources in the chat. I'm sure many of our, practitioners will benefit from that. So thank you so much. Thanks for your time. Let's move on to the next topic of our, presentation today. I would like to invite Dr. SVRK Prabhakar, who works with the Institute for Global Environmental Studies, Japan, as a principal policy researcher. He has been a lead author for the Adaptation Gap Report, a contributing author to the 5th and 6th assessment reports of the IPCC Working Group 2. He's also a coordinating lead author for the UNEP Geo 6 report and lead author, for the ASEAN State of Climate report. So thank you so much and welcome. His primary areas of interest are on transboundary impacts of climate change, vulnerability assessments, loss and damage, mainstreaming DRR CCA into development, adaptation metrics, etc. He has led various research projects in Southeast Asia, and he possesses more than 20 years of experience in this area. So thank you, and he will be speaking to us on bringing in the climate change perspective and the CCA effectiveness and the loss and damage to assess as to how do we know that if existing CCA interventions are reaching their limits and cannot mitigate some of the residual challenges, and what more needs to be done to advance action forward. Over to you, Dr. Prabhakar. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you very much, Rajiv, for introduction, and hello, everybody. So as introduced by Rajiv, I will be discussing about how can we avoid disasters from a climate change perspective. Within climate change, we have two opportunities. One is adaptation effectiveness. The other one is addressing loss and damage. So I would like to spend some time discussing on how we can make this happen. So yeah, so the outline of the presentation is something like this. First of all, I would like to spend some time on some mechanics of avoiding disasters. And then we will go into seeing whether or not it is possible to get an evidence for avoiding disasters. Then we will see two opportunities presented by climate change to avoid disasters, and then we will conclude the discussion. So if you look at the avoiding disasters perspective, there are two different dimensions to it. One is avoiding disasters over the time. So in which we see that as we keep on improving our disaster reduction systems, over the time period, we see that the impacts, either measured as deaths or affected people or affected services or income lost or infrastructure damage, things like that, going down over the period. Compared to the business as usual scenario, where we see that the trend is on the opposite side. On the contrary, we also need to understand disasters avoided as a function of intensity of hazard versus impacts. For example, we need to understand that disasters avoided, the concept and the approach has to be applicable over a wide range of intensity and the duration of the hazard. It's, of course, we have been avoiding disasters for the past several years. Maybe that is at the lower end of the intensity and the duration of the hazard, but not definitely, or may not be possibly at the higher end of the scale. So if we have such a gradation in intensity and duration, then can we say that the disasters can be avoided across the entire scale? Probably that's where the entire crux of the problem and the solution of the avoiding disasters lies. So here I see that there is a critical threshold existing, and beyond which the services, the human lives and things like that will be affected at certain point of time in some locations. So we need to keep that particular perspective in mind when we define that disasters are avoided over a range of intensities. That is the case for most circumstances and contexts, but then that's certainly the case when the baseline conditions are constant and things are not changing over time. But as our speakers have informed us earlier, that the baseline is not the same, and especially a lot of things are dynamic in the world, including we are experiencing a lot of socioeconomic changes, demographic changes, and things like that. And climate change is also acting as a threat multiplier, affecting all these dimensions. So I wonder whether disasters avoided, whatever the perspective I presented in the previous slide, holds good, even with a dynamic changes that we are experiencing. So from that particular point of view, we need to understand disasters avoided as a dynamic concept, as a progressive concept, and we need to look into this concept as a more aspirational, not as a kind of a for sure short concept, as was also voiced by the earlier panel members. So having said this, I would like to bring us 3 points. One is, we may have already been avoiding disasters to a certain extent, but I would like to say that the evidence is hard to come by. The second one is that the climate change may not be always about the threats and negatives, but also it could also provide us a certain opportunity to avoid disasters, especially if we can crack the puzzle of adaptation effectiveness as well as loss and damages. So I'll go a little bit deeper into these 3 elements further in my presentation. So in terms of disasters avoided as a kind of evidence is hard to come by. I'm very glad to see that in my previous presenter in the panel, they have presented on the ground evidence, and which is very good. But always it is not possible that on the ground evidences come to the extent of the higher level of the data that we, most of us, we are data crunchers. We want to see these individual experiences are combined into data at a macro level. And to me, it occurs that probably it is not so easy, and those evidences are masked. For example, I have given here 2 charts. On the left side, you will see the Asia total annual deaths and the total number of people affected due to hydroclimatological and meteorological events during 1970 to 2022. If you just take a glance at the graph, you will see that probably it's not presenting much information. But if you come down to Asia level, if you calculate the per event number of deaths, per event number of people affected over the time period, but not graphing individual events, but taking a moving average, then you will see that definitely there is a very clear trend of a drastic reduction in the number of people dead over the years, very, very significant. And you will see that the average number of deaths per event in Asia is hardly crossing 20 people per event. That's very startling average number. Of course, I mean, we say that every death should be avoided, but then the number of deaths have come down very significantly to the extent of average of 20. And also the number of people affected are declined, even though the number of events are increasing exponentially since 1970. So that's a very good trend that we want to have as a disaster reduction professionals. But then still this particular image is not providing us a very clear trend, because what we want to see is what are those hazards that are not converting into disasters. So if you look into EMDAT database, that doesn't tell you, that doesn't list all those hazards which have not resulted into any kinds of losses. If we are missing half of that information, then probably we are only looking at one side of the coin. And that's the kind of analysis that we need to look into. What are the kinds of events that countries are facing, the hazard events, but still not getting affected. Probably if you look into, I wanted to look into the Japan case and say that, I wanted to tell you all that, in Japan, a wind speed of 180 kilometers per hour is no more affecting lives, is no more taking lives, and is not causing any economic damage. But unfortunately, I am starved of the data publicly available. It must be available somewhere. But what I did was I took the EMDAT data again and then plotted it as a moving average. And we can see that the number is going down. And compared to the Asia's average of 20 people dead per event, in Japan, since 1980s, no event has an average of 10 years. We see that total number of people died is less than 10, which is much lower than Asia's average, which is very good. But still, we need to do much more than that. So that's where we are in terms of getting the evidence, in terms of that the macro level. And unless otherwise, these individual case studies, they contribute to our ability to identify that, an investment in disaster reduction can avoid disasters, that can incentivize policymakers to invest more in disaster reduction. And unfortunately, the graphs like this, they don't communicate, and we need to come up with much more robust evidences. So that's the point I wanted to make. I have just 5 minutes going by the time. The second two opportunities that we have is, one is related to loss and damages. Of course, loss and damages occur in the context of the climate change due to our inability to implement, climate change adaptation and disaster reduction initiatives, as well as the GHG mitigation. And it's also because of the limits to adaptation, which is related to both hard and soft limits. So we see that after we implement a range of known adaptation and disaster reduction solutions, at the end of the day, we are still going to experience certain losses and damages. And we are at that particular stage of understanding that what are we going to do about those residual risks? How are we going to address them? So that's so just by looking at that particular equation, we can say that there are obviously certain disasters that we cannot avoid from the context of the climate change. Of course, the GHG mitigation, we can invest all the money and resources we have. That can only lead to certain outcome, limited outcome, I would say, and both because of the also the climate memory of our climate system. This famous assessment report diagram will tell you that, even if you achieve the entire mitigation in the next 100 years, the ocean swelling will continue to happen, and sea level rise will continue to happen, and we continue to experience extreme events hundreds of years beyond our mitigation target we reached. The second one is obviously we have climate change adaptation and disaster reduction interventions. They can minimize certain extent of loss and damages, but they can't really nullify them. So ultimately, what we are left with is residual risks. So I just want to bring you here one example. I don't want to read through the entire slide. There are many approaches that can minimize loss and damages. But one interesting example that I can inform you is, for example, how the forecasting, weather forecasting can improve our quality of life. And this is the photograph I want to show you here on the right side. This is the Gion Festival in Kyoto in 2006. The weather forecasting in Japan is so precise that the meteorological agency of Japan can tell that, you know, between so and so hours, the rainfall will stop or rainfall will come to a drizzling speed or intensity, so that you can conduct your cultural festival, whether it is a Gion festival or it is a fireworks. And you won't trust me, unless otherwise you are in Japan, you can't trust me, that, you know, you go to the festival and you look at your watch, you know, plus or minus 10 minutes, 30 minutes, you will see that the rain will stop, and then the procession will start, the fireworks will start. And exactly by the time the Japan Meteorological Agency says that the rain will resume automatically. This is one example I can show you. And I have only, unfortunately, the evidence for one photograph. The second evidence I want to bring to you is the extent to which the risk mitigation in the infrastructure level happened in Japan, that even after 180, 190, 200 kilometers per hour wind speed, the next day early in the morning, you don't see anything on the roads, you know, no fallen poles, no fallen trees, just only some broken umbrellas here and there. And the life will go on unaffected. So that's why I said, you know, we need to have a certain level of those investments happening to a perfection level, so that a certain quality of life continues to happen after disaster, after a particular hazard event. I'll move on from here to the adaptation effectiveness because the paucity of the time. Adaptation effectiveness is a concept which tells us that an action will reduce vulnerability and climate related risk, increase the resilience, and avoids maladaptation. So if you look at the definition, probably it looks very simple, but in reality, we don't know for many adaptation interventions, whether it is a risk insurance or a dike or mangroves erected in a coastal region, we don't know to what extent these particular interventions will last in terms of the time scale, in terms of the intensity of the disaster, or in terms of the warming, you know, global warming. Because of this uncertainty, a lot of solutions that we implement today, we don't know to what extent they will work for how long. So, and there is not much work, unfortunately, and it's also very interesting because a lot of these solutions, they originate from disaster reduction sphere, and even today we don't have a proper reliable estimates of effectiveness of these various interventions. And without that, probably our objective of mitigating disasters or avoiding disasters may not come to reality. One theoretical framework that has been promoted within the space of adaptation effectiveness is, if we are able to conduct risk assessments over a time period, and if you can see any decline in measured risk reduction in a subsequent risk assessments, probably we can say that those reductions in risk assessments can be directly attributed to adaptation interventions that we have introduced. That's a very simplistic assumption, but then still we are not able to isolate various other influencing factors that may affect our observation of the reduction in the risk. So that's where we are in terms of the adaptation effectiveness. We also are unable to translate our risk assessments because of this limited understanding of instruments that we have at hand. Very few number of sectors, for example, in the water resources and in agriculture, we can conduct a reliable risk assessments with and without adaptation interventions. But in many other sectors, we are not able to conduct because we don't have data of what we call vulnerability functions. For example, for a given depth of flood and the duration of the flood, what is the amount of damage a particular crop or a particular house or a particular bridge will experience. So if we don't have that information, we will not be able to conduct reliable risk assessments. And those kind of relationships are not possible exactly in many non-economic losses. For example, ecosystem services, social capital, justice, equity. What are those vulnerability functions possible in those areas? We are still to go into details. So in conclusion, I would say that probably disasters can be avoided if we can be clear about our definition of the disaster, as I have explained in the first slide, both over the time period as well as intensity of the hazard. And the same definition problem also applies to both adaptation effectiveness as well as loss and damage. So once we have a very good on the ground, evidences of pinpointing effectiveness towards a particular outcome, then I would say that we can certainly avoid certain disasters. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Prabhakar. Excellent, food for thought here in your presentation, speaking about disasters avoided as a dynamic and a progressive, a concept and not a static one. And of course, talking us through the adaptation effectiveness as well as the loss and damage approaches to enhance our risk reduction efforts. The example from Japan is really informative, quite useful. And of course, that investments in DRR can help avoid disasters, though of course, it is not possible to move towards a zero avoidance, but towards a reduction, especially of their socioeconomic impacts across sectors and communities. Many pointers there for our consideration, and we will surely come back to them. Maybe our participants, they will also have a lot of questions to raise, because this has been really thought-provoking. So thank you so much for your excellent intervention here. With this, let me turn on to our next speaker, Ms. Anna Thalun, who is a governance and public administration expert who works with UN-DESA and is supporting member states in strengthening capacities for public servants for more effective, accountable, and inclusive public institutions to deliver the SDGs and to foster risk-informed governance. Anna has worked with the UN system in various capacities since 2005, including in UNDRR's Office for the Northeast Asia, the Getty Initiative, and has also led the Secretariat of the International Recovery Platform in Kobe, Japan. She has co-authored the policy briefs on strengthening DRR and resilience for climate action through risk-informed governance, as well as another piece on trilateral best practices on application of technology for reducing disaster risks in China, Japan, and Korea. Anna will be sharing her experience on leveraging the potential offered by technology to reduce disaster risks and to foster resilience. Thanks, Anna, and over to you for the next 15 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think the presentation, you can see, yeah, you can see well. Thank you.
Yes, yes.
Perfect. Let me first thanks to UNDP, UNDR, and MNCR for organizing this webinar and extending an invitation to UNDESA to contribute to the webinar. As many of you are aware, the high-level political forum has been underway since last week, and during the forum, the president of the ECOSOC has emphasized the significance of innovation, technology, and impactful partnerships between government, civil society, and the private sector to really facilitate a meaningful change. And this, it goes also for what we are talking today in this webinar. How, how we can avoid disasters, what approaches can be used. And innovation and technology is a good approach to help to reduce the risk of the disasters. So my presentation is first on science, technology, and innovation in the 2030 Agenda. leveraging digital technologies for DRR and resilience. I will explain some of the frontier technologies and how they are applied through some case studies applications across different countries. First of all, like the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction, the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development has been for decades of long evolutionary and collaborative process. And in this long process since 1992 to 2015, which was adopted, the 2030 Agenda. I'm trying to move to the next slide. Oops, too quickly. We have established science and technology as a very important area, like the Commission on Science and Technology for Development. They have been providing characteristics of technology for DRR. And in their characteristics for technology for DRR, they wanted multi-purpose, easy to learn and use technology, a scalable technology, and accessible and affordable technology. The Commission has provided a number of recommendations, and one of them is participatory research methods and scientific collaboration, traditional local indigenous knowledge, developing analytical frameworks, leveraging of private sector participation, and there's many others like ensuring technology for resilience and citizens science project, which should be documented. In the UNDRR, they have been promoting tremendously the support of science and technology and information in DRR through different approaches. They have through the regional science and technology advisory groups, a broader science and technology partnerships, which is a big partnership. This is since also many years, since 1990. They started with the IDNDR, they were starting establishing a scientific and technical committee in 2001, a scientific and technical advisory group, and so on, promoting different into the regions science and technology for DRR. So how we can leverage these digital technologies for DRR and resilience? Why this is important? It will help to anticipate, to respond, and to recover from disasters effectively. The word effectively is that they really help us to save life and make a difference. And it promotes to access to critical and innovative public services in time. For example, of the public health emergencies, we have seen that during COVID-19. And the data-driven and evidence-based decision-making. Technology will help with good quality data sharing, and data analytics is an enabler for public health emergencies, and effective and timely data is key for risk-informed decision-making, and strengthen and streamline early warning platforms. I will give you some other examples. In terms of risk-informed governance, also through digital government technologies are key enablers for achieving the SDGs. Through all the SDGs, I will share this presentation. You can see how technology can contribute in different aspects to e-learning or to e-health or e-agriculture, and different aspects as climate change, just talking the speaker before me. Some digital and frontier technologies, I'm checking my time, that are available today. We have a blockchain, we have Internet of Things, we have artificial intelligence, big data, and robotics, and how we can use them. So first of all, I would like to share one which is very common use, and maybe it's very familiar to you, is cloud computing, which is an internet base, which is more than just data information storage. It's a variety of approaches from data storage to processing. And the cloud computing can help a lot on e-government, for example, to deliver its services. That will help in enhancing disaster services with the cloud. It can help on collaborating and planning. It can help to rapid resumption of critical services and also rapid provision of emergency services. The cloud computing also can help on capacity to manage surge in demand for data, information. I think we have an example also. We just heard from Japan a lot. but I will have to add some also examples from Japan. One is the Japan Cloud Service in 2011, which the problem was the disaster can cause profound interruptions, both the public and private sectors, and it can cause loss of services and economic impacts. So what was needed is data assurance and rapid resumption of computing capabilities and access to services. So the obstacle of the servers and computing terminals was damaged by disasters. So what the solution they had is the mirroring of IT systems using cloud service, and it was already put into practice and service. There is also Internet of Things. You maybe have heard of it. It's a technological domain. It's a technological, I just repeat, not a technology in and or of itself. It presents capabilities and enabler of frontier and other technologies to two primary purposes of things. So it's sensing and actuation. So the network, a network that connects uniquely to the internet. But it serves for disaster risk management and resilience in mitigation and preparedness by sensing the hazards, citizen science and training and education. In response and recovery, remote operations of vehicles and devices, which are very well known, communication and collaboration, and for example, big data analysis. A case study of Internet of Things for river flooding in Colombia, for example. The problem was that the risk from the riverine flooding and associated landslides risk was threatening the citizens in remote village community was very far. The need early warning capabilities, and the obstacle was the manual collection of riverine and precipitation data was not responsive enough to provide effective warnings. So the solution is the Internet of Things connected to sensors and automated warning systems, identify flood risk, and communicate those to the disaster risk management stakeholders, to the main institution who was in charge of managing risk and disasters in the country. Another technology available is blockchain. You also probably aware is the blockchains, how it works. It requires some requests of transaction. Those requests are broadcast to a P2P and network, peer-to-peer learning, consisting of computers known as nodes. Then those nodes are verified. So the transaction is verified by participants of the blockchains. And then they create, after the verification, they create a new block of data for the ledger. That new block is then added to the existing blockchain in a way that is permanent and unalterable. And this is then a transaction is completed. So this has been also already very well used in collection and management of disaster financing, disaster preparedness, emergency medical and public health services, and vital personal documents. Big data analytics, another frontier information technology, advanced form of data analytics. It required extraordinary computer power, and coordination with data owners is required. A case study from the Pulse Lab in Jakarta, also you might be familiar, is in Indonesia. This lab has used the cyclone Moon, which is a response to cyclones. Response to cyclones is impacted by rapidly changing conditions, and the stale data is more of a liability than a help. So they need incorporation of real-time data on hazards, conditions, and populations, and the obstacle is no mechanisms exist to quickly aggregate and process the streams of dynamic data that are generated. So the big data incident management platform with a hazard-specific focus helps to provide information on, and the name is the Cyclone Moon platform. I recommend you to visit, it's very interesting. What about the artificial intelligence and machine learning? We're talking a lot about them since many years. There are many definitions of artificial intelligence. The Russell and Novick says that study of agents that perceive from the environment and perform actions. The Encyclopedia Britannica concept of artificial intelligence is the ability of digital computer or computer-controlled robots to perform tasks commonly associated with intelligence beings. So there is not yet a full definition. There are many definitions. I can still continue reading, but there are a few specific defining characteristics. In the slide is intentionality, the intelligence, and the adaptability. What are the risks of artificial intelligence? It's always the human bias, the human tendencies, human preconceptions, and also the human error. It always can happen. With the example of a very simple application on that use artificial intelligence and machine learning is the Earthquake Smart Space application. This is, one of the problems on earthquake is building contents and configurations can increase or decrease the seismic risk. Citizens are more resilient by mitigating high-risk arrangement and by learning what protection options are offered to them. The obstacle is risk assessments of building contents requires a minimum level of technical expertise. So this solution is a smartphone-based artificial intelligence risk assessment system that uses the phone camera to identify the risk. Very simple, but it's the use of artificial intelligence. Another example, a little bit more complex, is artificial intelligence analysis of satellite data to predict disasters. The problem of evacuation is to be location specific to be efficient and effective. The rapid decision of evacuation supports based on current data. The obstacle is the satellite data covering the wider impact area exists, but analysis often takes too much time to effectively support the evacuation. So what is the solution? Is the artificial intelligence that combines satellite image with current weather data and data from ground-based sensors to recommend evacuation plans. And this is done by JAXA. You can find JAXA is also from Japan. I think we have time over, or are we fine? Because I cannot see you.
1 minute more, Anna.
Okay. So let me give you another example of application of frontier technologies, and as a way of avoiding disasters. In this concept that my predecessor speaker said, disasters avoided as a dynamic concept. This is an example of drones, how we use drones fly for disaster relief in Puerto Rico. Communities in remote locations have ongoing public health requirements, and they are outside. It's difficult to reach the deliveries and supplies. So here, one example is the use of alternative delivery machines, more and more use now for long distance UAV flights, unmanned flights. UNICEF is using the same system for providing vaccination in remote areas in Vanuatu. Humanitarian cash transfers in Vanuatu also. They are using the blockchain-based cash card program in partnership with verified businesses in the impacted area. This is, I also like it very much. It's in the United Arab Emirates. It's an extreme weather app. It's really accessible application, launches in 2016, which alert the citizens and uses smartphone real-time satellite data. Innovative technologies for smart and resilient cities. There are many using ICTs. For example, Seoul in Korea, which is my last slide, use a real-time emergency disaster information collected, hazard monitoring, and public alert and warning. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anna. Excellent. I think we have like a wide, arena of technological applications, which can assist in improving disaster management outcomes, as well as risk informing our decision making and governance systems. Lots of specific examples clearly help us understand which particular technology can be deployed in what context, etc. Noting that we are running out of time, so I would like to turn to questions quickly. I see that quite a few questions have already been raised in the question answer chat box, and many of them have already been answered by our panelists. So I think that's pretty proactive. It saves us a lot of time. So do we have any other questions at this time, or otherwise I would like to pose a few questions which came to mind as we were listening to some excellent presentations and ideas today. So my first one would be perhaps to Professor Ilan and Gareth. When we speak in terms of investing in say prevention, which is better than cure, we see that there is a dissonance between the planning and the electoral cycle, as well as the timeframes needed, for an effective investments into resilience building and risk reduction, which traditionally need a much longer time frame as opposed to some of the shorter term interventions. And politically, it yields more dividends to be shown as doing something more in terms of a post-crisis or a post-disaster event, as opposed to investing slowly and steadily in a risk reduction and a resilience building paradigm. How do we overcome this sort of a challenge?
That is the question. And you've articulated it so well. There's a number of ways that we can move forward, but none are entirely certain, and we are still working on it. So any advice from the audience would be appreciated. Number one is, yes, prevention is better than cure, but prevention is also cheaper than cure. And many politicians and public agencies are looking for the money. So I did put a paper in the chat, which is a compilation of cost-benefit analyses showing how much avoiding disasters saves money. The other element is that many public servants, whether they are in a democracy or not, are there for the long term and are very dedicated to this work. So they often recognize that political leaders in democracies have the short-term cycle, which you mentioned, and political leaders not in democracies may not always be interested in the people, but they are trying their best within their governance systems. We can work with them. We can understand their needs and understand what they require, while also identifying the elected and non-elected officials who really do care about avoiding disasters and doing wider work. So there's really no easy approach. So much is contextual. What we can say is we have the evidence, and we need help with everyone, including everyone here, on communicating it in different ways to those who make decisions. And I think, Gareth, you can also comment on this.
Yeah. Just to follow up on Ilan's points there, Rajiv, I think making sure that we do maintain the evidence, the information. Of course, it can get dispersed in various different ways, but making sure that we do have it. And something that we mentioned earlier as well is perhaps if we can make sure that it is produced and put together in a way that there's valuable visuals that we can use as well, that perhaps can stick in people's minds, as well as, of course, backed by the right kind of data. So just to build on Ilan's points there, let's make sure that we don't forget about these things. There are things that have happened. There are success stories down the decades that we can continue to use. They're still valid.
Thank you so much. Thanks for this, pointers and this guidance. I see Dr. Prabhakar has also, put in some thoughts and ideas in the chat box from his side. And quickly, since do we have any other question here? Oh, that's being answered by UNDRR team. So, okay, another, question maybe, from my side again. Extremely, it has set my thinking, rolling now number of challenges and those things to be addressed. I see that many of you, all the panelists, have emphasized the need in order to avoid disasters, it is a dynamic, thing. It is not something static. So when we do, from a DRR community's perspective, we traditionally do a risk analysis, a risk assessment, so which is based on a given context and a given data. But if we need to be ahead of the curve, or if our intelligence has to be faster than the intelligence of the hazards, let's say they are smarter than us also many a times, do we need to invest more into risk anticipation, and how do we do that? Can, again, Anna, to you also, can some of these technologies be employed to have that better understanding of how the risks are likely to unfold and play out? So do we need to shift that needle towards more anticipatory risk, understanding as to how it is likely to come about? Like in the, military jargon, if we were to say, many of those, field units, they do all those practices, and they say that it's the more you sweat in peace, the less you bleed in war. So if we are able to have that, scenarios and are able to sweat along those scenarios, maybe, we'll be able to avoid the disasters going ahead. So any thoughts around that in terms of shifting the focus towards risk anticipation and how to do it?
Thank you. By actively assessing risk and anticipating the potential hazards, we really can proactively make measures to prevent minimize this impact of disasters. I think this importance of involvement of analyzing available data. So what that means is also identifying vulnerabilities and understanding the potential consequence of the risk. I think the question of investing in risk anticipation allows for better preparedness, early warning systems for sure. And all the different technologies I mentioned, they are specifically, they are helpful for risk analysis, providing maps. And as you know, someone was also mentioning about NASA, but NASA also and China, the Ministry of Emergency Management of China, they provide available data for countries to anticipate risk. They have satellite data and information and tools. So I think investment in terms of infrastructure, but investment also in terms of partnership, I think is strongly required if we really want to avoid disasters. Thank you.
Thank you so much. There is a question in the chat box. Dr. Prabhakar, maybe this will be for you. How can the nexus of DRR-CCA sustainability happen and be useful and not just a new project title, considering that the convergence of DRR-CCA during the HFA was also only initiated, but no longer explicitly supported in the SF Sendai framework? Is there any evidence that experts in both are already working well together? Sometimes it has to be from them before going to policy makers. And I will just add on to that, question you mentioned in one of your slides about avert, minimize, address. So when you are speaking about averting in the context of loss and damage, you appear to be, focusing more on mitigation side of the equation. Do you think it's relevant again to bring in the risk reduction elements here into this, thinking also? Over to you.
Yeah, thank you for the question. It's very interesting as also a very important question, especially, for example, if you look at the global level, we have SFDRR, we have a Paris Agreement. They seem to not to refer to each other explicitly, but then after the fact, those frameworks are developed. There are efforts to kind of collaborate between these global level frameworks. But at the national level, I see that already happening. For example, National Disaster Management Committees and climate change committees, they are multi-sectoral and multi-ministerial groupings, and they actually include experts from all the departments. And that's as Rajiv said, even within the loss and damage, we are considering, solutions coming from disaster reduction space as well, contributing to some of the minimizing effect on the loss and damages related to climate change. And that is also contributing to some of the confusion at the, practitioner level, because when we talk about climate change, loss and damage, basically the definition is after we implement all the adaptation actions. But in the UNFCCC literature, we see that, forecasting, early warning, and insurance, all the tools that are already being discussed in the DRR space are also being included in the discussions on loss and damage. In a way, losing the focus on the ultimate problem of how do we address the residual risks after we implement all these adaptation options or DRR options. What are those risks that will remain? and how do we address them? But we are still, kind of very creeping into that area, but we don't still have a proper example of really working on the ground, to address that particular problem. But in terms of the discussion and collaboration between DRR and CCA communities, it's happening at the ground level, at the national level. I could see it. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. I know that we are already over time by nearly 17 minutes now, and but there is a lot of interest, and the participants are truly engaged. So there are two more, questions. One, what challenges and data gaps do you see for local risk analysis, and what are the opportunities there? And connected thereto is another one, how the synergies and interlinkages of the global framework can help to avoid the disaster and enhance efforts at national, regional, and international level. Please, any of the panelists, I think this is open.
Sure, I can address that, and I'm sure the others have incredible expertise and experience in it. The two questions are really connected. We are well aware that, as the question stated, so much occurs to create disasters and to avoid disasters at the local level. And if we do not give people the power, opportunities, and resources to help themselves and those around them, in effect, that is not disaster risk reduction, including climate change adaptation. Yet many people also don't have these opportunities, which is where coming in from outside, coming in from these wider global frameworks and the regional international efforts contribute. So it is about connecting, it is about bringing people together. And it's not really top down, bottom up. It's just saying there are different levels, different scales, horizontally and vertically, which have to link and support each other. But ultimately, the goal is for people to help themselves and therefore ripple outwards and help others. And that's what the international frameworks and the international organizations, as well as science, are very much committed to doing.
And Rajiv, just to add to those points from Milan there are some really good examples on the ecological side of how people in their communities are being involved and engaged to be able to track different types of data about flora and fauna that is being used and is proving extremely valuable. So I think people are getting a sense of genuinely being part of initiatives that lead to action. And as Dr. Prabhakar has said, if we can improve the quantification of things, then we can then show more of that evidence-based side of things.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I think I would like to thank all of you, eminent panelists. Excellent presentations, really thought-provoking today. I have jotted down quite a few ideas and which I would definitely like to continue to brainstorm with you over coming days and weeks. And special thanks to our UNDRR, your colleagues. It's very late in the evening for them in South Korea, and they are still up and supporting us to organize and handle all the backside work in terms of technology, the system, the platform, and other logistic arrangements. So thank you so much. Thanks a lot to all the participants for joining us from different time zones. Very interesting, very engaging presentations and discussions. We hope to continue to challenge ourselves over coming days with these notions and have better ideas on how to improve our practice over days and months to come. Thank you so much, and look forward to staying in touch. Bye-bye. Thanks.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.